Wow, 470 subscribers and over 27,000 upload views. I had no idea I'd reach these numbers by June. Before I start, I'd like to thank all of you guys for the great support you've shown me over the last 3 months, and I'd like to thank you for being so patient during my exams, where I was extremely busy and unable to work on any videos. Well, my exams are over and summer is finally here, so it's time for some more videos. I obviously haven't had any time for any battles over the last month or so, and I don't have any decent battle replays just yet. Many of you guys were very annoyed that my last video, which was battle number 7, was a 2v2 against some pretty lousy opponents. I realize that some people don't appreciate commentators who put up battles where they just slaughter a much weaker opponent, but the fact of the matter is that the majority of the battles I play online are against similar opponents to the ones I had in battle 7. At the end of the day, the decision comes down to you guys. I can give you a battle a week, on average, against a decent opponent, or I can give you 2 or even 3 battles a week against campers and noobs. All I'm saying is that it's not very easy to find decent opponents, especially since most people suffer from the no response from host error, more often than not. Anyway, since I don't have any decent battle replays just yet, I've decided to go through with something that I've wanted to do for a while now, but never actually got the chance to start. The majority of you guys seem to really appreciate the tips and tactical advice I've been giving in my videos, so I've decided to introduce something relatively new to the YouTube Total War community, and that is an online multiplayer tactics series. If this turns out to be successful, it's only going to be sort of like a side project that I'll work on while making commentaries. So, how are these videos going to be any different to my commentaries, you might ask? Well, I already give advice and tactics in my commentaries, but the difference between the tactics videos and the commentaries is that the tactics are going to be much more in-depth. The aim of this series is to help players of all skill levels to gain insight into the multiplayer part of the game. It seems the majority of the people who play this game stick to single player and aren't very familiar with the ways of multiplayer battles. These videos will go over everything from the basics, such as simple flanking maneuvers, all the way to the advanced stuff, like specific battle strategies that you can employ. In other words, think of these videos as in-depth battle tutorials for the multiplayer portion of the game. For those of you who've watched my first 7 videos, you'll notice that I always favor attacking over defending, and these tutorials will be primarily focused on going over all the fundamentals of playing aggressively. I hope you guys find these overviews to be valuable learning tools. Anyway, as I've already mentioned, I want to make these overviews useful to players of all skill levels, so I've decided to begin with the very basics. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the basic composition of a multiplayer army. For those of you who have never been online, here's the first thing you should know. Most players who host battles have rules. Those rules are typically no fixed artillery, which is artillery that cannot be moved after deployment, for example rocket troops, and usually a maximum of 2 artillery pieces per player. Some players will also limit the number of long-range units you can bring, and the limit is usually a maximum of 5. Single-player armies are typically heavy on artillery, and the point I'm trying to make here is that most of the time you can't bring the armies you use in single-player to multiplayer battles. Now there are 6 main unit types in Napoleon Total War, and they are long-range infantry, which is shown on the screen now, line infantry, which form the bulk of your army, militia, cavalry, artillery, and last but not least, generals. Now the standard multiplayer army consists of about 5 long-range units, which I've selected right now, anywhere between 6 and 9 line infantry units, usually around 4 cavalry units, and typically 2 howitzers, and of course a general. This is generally speaking. If you invest too heavily in one unit type, you're going to limit the number of other unit types that you can bring. The trick is to have a well-balanced army setup that consists of units that complement each other effectively. Over the course of this tactics series, I'll explain and recommend certain army builds for different factions, but that's for much later. First, let's look at long-range infantry. By long-range infantry, we mean anything that has a range of 90 or more. When the unit scale is set to large, units that are 90 men strong and have a range of 90 are known as light infantry. Units that are 60 men strong and have a range of 125 are known as skirmishers. Both have their advantages and disadvantages, and I'll explain these in a lot more detail in another video. Long-range infantry are primarily used to screen your line infantry. By screen, I mean they form a diffuse cloud that marches ahead of your main battle line and act as a sort of shield to your line infantry units. Long-range infantry units have higher accuracy and longer range than line infantry units, and are also able to march in what is called skirmish formation. When light infantry are set to skirmish, they spread out into an irregular formation rather than a solid line. This is useful in two ways. A, they become less vulnerable to fire because of their less compact formation, and B, they kneel down, and this allows line infantry units behind them to fire over their heads. Light infantry are vital in Napoleon Total War, and they often play a huge role in the outcome of a battle. Now let's talk about line infantry. These units make up the biggest part of your army and can also be divided into two groups as well. There's standard line infantry and elite line infantry. Standard line infantry typically have different names depending on the faction you are playing. For example, Prussian line are simply called musketeers, but Great Britain's line is called foot. Both standard line and elite line have the same range of 80 and are always 120 men strong when the unit scale is set to large. I'm not going to compare standard line and elite line just yet, but don't worry, I'm going to explain each in much more detail later on. For now, let's just stick to the very basics. Line infantry are typically the units that get you most of your kills in a battle, and it is therefore very important that you use them correctly. The first thing you should know about line infantry is that they don't fire by rank anymore like in Empire Total War. In the last game, the first rank would fire, kneel down, the second rank would then fire a volley, kneel down, and then finally the third rank would fire. In Napoleon, only the first rank can fire, but line infantry fire is a lot faster this time around. So the best way to maximize the firepower of your line infantry units is to spread them out into thinner lines, 2 ranks deep. I'll explain why 2 ranks is generally better than 1 rank or 3 ranks later, but for now, just learn this as a rule of thumb. Line infantry is always best used in 2 ranks. Line infantry should always support long-range infantry, just like long-range infantry should always support line infantry. The two depend on each other greatly. When you stand your line infantry units behind your long range, you form what is called a double line of battle. The long-range infantry will kneel down in front of the line infantry, and both units are able to fire at the enemy. This gives you double the firepower. Last but not least, line infantry can form squares. When line infantry are in square formation, they are lethal to even the best of cavalry. You should always form squares just before enemy cavalry charges your line infantry. Next, we'll look at militia. Militia are not exactly combat effective, and so most people tend to avoid bringing them to battle. However, they can be pretty useful in the hands of a good player. The fact that they are so cheap means you can sacrifice them to protect your more expensive and important units in what is called a meat shield. Again, I'll go over this in another tutorial. Cavalry is another very important unit class in Napoleon Total War. Your ability to maximize your cavalry's efficiency can often mean the difference between victory and defeat. Cavalry can be divided into light cavalry and heavy cavalry. For now, I just want you to keep in mind that the most effective cavalry overall are Lancer cavalry units. They are the fastest cavalry units and have a devastating charge that can deal tons of damage on impact. Heavy cavalry have good melee stats, but they are very slow and tire much quicker. And to make things worse for them, Lancer cavalry can destroy heavy cavalry if used correctly. Most people tend to have 3 or 4 Lancers in their army and avoid bringing heavy cavalry. Cavalry use is such a huge topic that I'll most likely dedicate an entire tutorial to talk about their uses in battle. For now, keep in mind that cavalry are used to disrupt your enemy's battle line and take out valuable targets such as artillery and generals. Artillery is a lot more useful in Napoleon Total War in comparison to Empire. It is a lot more accurate and fires a little faster. Most people avoid round-shot artillery and stick to howitzers due to the fact that howitzers deal a lot more damage. Artillery is most effective against cavalry. You should always try to take out the enemy general and other enemy cavalry units with your artillery when you get the chance. The downfall of artillery is that it is generally very slow and pretty expensive. Last but not least, let's take a look at generals. Generals are extremely important in Napoleon Total War. There are 4 generals for every faction. A standard general with no stars, a 3-star general, a 6-star general, and a 9-star general. The better your general, the better your army will fight, and the longer they will last in battle. Generals now have 2 abilities that can help boost your army's morale or improve the stats of a specific unit. Keeping your general alive is extremely important. If your general dies, your army will fight really badly and will be much more prone to routing. And I guess that's all for this first video. I went over the very basics just to make sure that anyone, even people who have just bought the game, can get an idea of what to expect in multiplayer. Once I get all the very basics out of the way, I'll start going into the more advanced stuff. Thank you for watching, and sorry again for keeping you guys waiting for so long. I'm really looking forward to your feedback, so keep the comments coming, and stay tuned for my next commentary.